All right. I thought I would entertain an idea with you, kind of a kind of an overview way of looking at how reality is structured and what we're going through. And so there'll be some visualization. So try to, if you want to play along, just try to get into the visualization and try to open up your mind as much as possible to just kind of a new idea, explore a new idea that might bring some kind of like recognition of kind of like what's going on in your world. And then I thought I would share with you the weirdness of my experience and kind of what I'm finding. And that's what it seems like I'm entertaining people with, is just documenting the nature of mine and Chelsea's journey as we're doing this. And we do this a lot personally, and then we are seeing how this works with sharing it as a piece of creative art. And so I had some insight that I would share in that realm. So the first one we're going to talk about is like the idea is that we wake up on a speck of dust floating in infinite space, conscious, with just so much information. The people around us, the news or the information that gets to us that hasn't gotten to us yet. And what is the nature of that reality? So we'll say the first understanding of that, getting there, is let's separate this just to make it so we have like points that we're going to. And we'll have this idea of the ego as a part of consciousness. And this is the idea that the ego is the thing that is what we're up against to become more consciousness, to be more conscious, that if we go on to a conscious path. Or, we can look at it in different ways, but just think of this structure as like a big room, and we're all in this room, okay? And we're all like going, what the hell? Like, you're kind of human. We talk to each other, and you're doing things like you got to do things to take care of yourself, and the basic qualities of life. And then all of a sudden we start running into conflicts with these other humans, these that are going on. So we start coming up with ideas on how to deal with this reality. Like, what do we do with this? I don't know. And so we go at this level of just survival mode, of just getting by. And then all of a sudden we start communicating with each other, and we're saying things from feelings and wanting to get things. And so we'll say that like that survival level of just that basic is basically we wake up and we just really don't know what's going on. So the thing that we want to do is just do whatever it takes to keep this thing going. Because for some reason, we know the importance of this thing, this experience, because we get up and we do the things to keep the experience going. And so that's like the survival. And then all of a sudden, we have other things. Now we can communicate with each other consciously, and we're talking about how we feel and the things that we want, and in that becomes this great confusion. And to deal with this confusion, we say, well, we start making these rules. We look at morality to try to move our society forward, and we look at virtues, and then the development of religion. So all of these rules that we can put in the box, in this box, to be able to keep this life form going on. But now we're not just trying to keep the life form going on, we're starting to tell stories, and we start to say, oh my gosh, I want this story to live on after I'm done. So we're telling the story of when we're living, of what we want to be remembered for. So now we're telling a story about legacy. And this creates more confusion. But then then we have to kind of explore the idea that there is some other guiding light. So let's just say that there's the basic level, which is the ego level of just survival, and then realizing that there's another force, there's another something else going on within this structure. And let's look at it this way: that the structures kind of, this that the people start playing around with they kind of start splitting away from the ego structures, and they start exploring, and all of a sudden they find these things. And what they're finding is little rays of light that are coming in this room. But they can't see the ray of light through the confusion and the egoic structure. They just can't see the light. But then all of a sudden they say, okay, I'm going to challenge this ego thing. And these people go back, and then all of a sudden this revelation happens to them. And you can pick your character from history, like the Buddha or Jesus, the enlightened ones. And they said, okay, wait, no. This is the thing. There's light, and they caught a glimpse of that light. And then other people go, oh my gosh, that's wonderful. And then they build all of these ideas. They construct all of these ideas around this piece of the light. And then they're like, if you follow these rules, you'll end up in this little tiny, remember the light still coming down, and you're still going to end up just getting this little piece of the light. And so everybody argues about it, and they see this light. And then other people say, no, that's not working. And these other people go out and they experience the light, but they see the light somewhere else in the ray, and they describe it differently. And they say, there's this light, and we should focus our attention on it. This thing is called God, or this thing is called whatever name that that faction of people put together. And but the interesting part is they're talking about the same light, but the idea is they think they're talking about the light. They're talking about, and then they argue about this little piece of light, but they're only talking about the light. But what the teacher was actually telling them was, look for the source of the light. Look for the source of where the light comes from. And that's a whole different message. If people have created these structures and these rules that you needed to follow, then you'd only be able to see this bit of the light. But for some people, they go out and they study all of these traditions and ideas, and they begin to put these ideas together, and all of a sudden they see how these pieces of the light actually are the beam of light coming from outside of that sphere, of that egoic structure. And the guru, or the avatar that pointed them to it, got them fixated on the rules. And so the rules got messed up, because they started putting the rule, and the rules became more important than the message to look for the light. But the interesting part about it is that it's a keyhole. The light, what they don't know is the light is coming from a keyhole. And that keyhole is the present moment. That is the place of being in the present moment. And duality is the egoic structure that people believe themselves to be on. And then they just sit around and they argue about the piece of the light. But the message was there. Judge not lest you be judged is there. And it says it's not a punitive thing. It's how reality works. that judge not lest you be judged. Like if you judge, you are going to remain in a judgmental narrative. You will always remain in a judgmental narrative. And but there's the keyhole. You can go to the keyhole. And that's the nice thing about today is there's lots of great people that are just not focused on the fight within the people in the light, but they're pointing directly that, hey, we can go over to non-duality. We can go where we don't have to sit in judgment to try to create this layer. But the thing is that people can't recognize they're inside of this box. They have to recognize there is that point. And that's why there's so many messages that are calling out to say, inviting people to go into nature, to go into places where the present moment exists and to get familiar with it. So it's just kind of if we get lost. So for me, this idea is great because basically my experience was that I woke up understanding the keyhole and the importance of all the stories within the egoic structure just like whew, gone. And so the experience after you find the keyhole is to stay with your face up against the keyhole, is to stay motivated to be in the present moment, to be as what you can find in the present moment. And so here's an example of just awareness of being pulled. So I recently visited a household that's very noisy emotionally and literally. And I found myself being anxious and I found myself not being centered. I was speaking, the words that would come out of my mouth weren't the where I want to come from. I live to come from a place of being buoyant or neutral to buoyant before words even flow through my mouth. But I found myself experiencing this anxiety. And the way that I see it is that it's still a matter of me revisiting old parts of myself that I need to that I get to look at. That's a better way to say it is I get to look at those pieces of my life when I'm out of the present moment. I'm still in the light. I still recognize the light, but I get lost outside of the present moment. And so that's for me, that's visually, that's just a great thing. Like people often ask me, what is Paradigm B? And all Paradigm B is an invitation to the present moment. And then I'm basically sharing my revelation of what has been going on since you find like, what narrative am I playing? What character am I playing now that I'm in, that I'm living the Paradigm B position? And it is waking up every day convinced that like, okay, today's another day to stay in the present moment, stay as present as possible, and then find out what's happening, interact with Chelsea in a way that is centered and knowing that what's coming through me is of the highest vibration and resonance. So it got me reflecting on something else personal from my life, which is how ridiculously weird my life is. From where I left. And what I'm talking about, it is literally that way. But it's weird in what I had thought my life would look at and all the patterns that I had created. I had created all these security patterns, get a job, stay with it for 30 years and then retire and then have fun in retirement and play the roles in a marriage and have a family, and some of the weirdness wasn't my choice, but I recognize it was all great. It all worked to do the magic that is the experience that I'm having in this reality. But what was interesting is it's come to my attention that my life got really weird. And I remember talking about how weird my life was getting from what I was used to. And then somewhere along the way, I just stopped analyzing the weird. And then every once in a while, I just have this recollection of, geez, if I were to like account for my life and what is showing up inside my experience, I would go, man, that's weird. And you're holding a weird perspective. But what was also interesting was, why am I not sharing this? Why am I not sharing how weird my experience is along the way? And I don't know if this is a invitation for me to share the weirdness that coming along in my life. I think part of just anything that I share is the weirdness that's coming from my life. But personally, what does the weirdness represent? Like, what is happening? And what I'm recognizing is the way that I looked at this is like, at the beginning, let's call it my spiritual awakening, my spiritual journey. It was hard to change those patterns and those routines and everything else that I had created, and all these constructs I had created of what the world was, who I was in that world. And so, like, it's like the reverse of the frog in boiling water. It's the beginning of the spiritual journey was actually having the willingness to get into a jacuzzi that's way too hot, and then like adapt to oh my god, this is hard, this change and to put it that way, it's like this change is so hard, like, oh my god, like I'm burning my skin. I'm burning, and I was like burning away my old past, and the pain that came from losing the connection to those to those elements from my past is was harsh. And along the way, I just got used to being in that water. That I think now the water is just like the perfect temperature. If you could dial in your tub and keep it the perfect temperature where you don't start getting cold, but you don't get too hot, and you can just like melt in there and lay in there forever. And that's the weirdness. That's kind of how the weirdness shows up for me. So part of the weirdness is me having experiences where I go back, where I feel like, the old me I could just let go of, like, because it's gotten just so easy. But there's still elements that I need to go back in and revisit. And so life gives me these experiences to go back and revisit these old patterns that I was connected to, and just go, oh, okay, that's interesting. So what the interesting thing to me was that I always remember, like, when I looked up at a guru that I thought was like had it, and I was like, that person has it. And one for me was Eckhart Tolle. Like, it just seemed like this dude understood what the present moment was. But then I was looking at the character of Eckhart Tolle and thinking, do I want to be Eckhart Tolle? And I'm like, I don't feel like Eckhart Tolle. Like, I don't feel that I'm going to become whatever that was. And that is a ridiculous point of view if you're picking that up. And I can see that from the ridiculous point of view now. but we kind of emulate the people that were like, oh, but he's not like me. And that's what I had to realize, that I have a different connection to everything. And so it's like, I wanted to know if I know somebody, or I'm pretty sure this person is living with their eye in the keyhole. Like, they got it. They know what the present moment is, but they still are animating. So it's not the end. They're still animating. They're still playing a character out. But what does that character know about themselves? What is that character doing? And that's what I've been exploring once I found the non-duality, is like that character, it from the present moment just arrives through you. And so for me, it's more of like, I just do things and then I will just reflect on it and go, well, that was an interesting thing that I did. And like, what was that character? What was that motivation for that character? And so that's just been a fun perspective that I've taken. And how I wanted to, there was a way that I wanted to relate that. Oh, to the Trinity. So there's always this idea of the Trinity, and there's this idea of the Trinity in Christianity and lots of different ideas. And non-duality would say that, okay, duality is, there's two. There's good and bad, positive and negative. And then there would be this other idea. So it could be the Trinity and non-duality. You find more after that. For me, what I found it as, and that feels really good to me, is when I am in presence, when I have my eye up, my consciousness, my conscious eye up to the keyhole. That is when I find what I call the cheeky choice. And it's like, there is, in duality, there's either one side or another, and then that's where you take sides. And then if you see how that duality thing works out, it never works out. It just always eats itself. But with a Trinity, the Trinity is the little splinter. It's what an answer is to what seems like a polarizing situation. And to get there, that's where Chelsea and I have found, with Lenzafarianism, that idea. It's just an overlay like any other kind of spiritual or reality or whatever. It's just an overlay. Lenzafarianism is the way that you find the cheeky. And now to me, it's the Trinity. It's the answer that lies outside of what seems like a dualistic argument, or a bind. Let's call it a bind, a dualistic bind. And it comes in a cheeky manner. And that when we find ourselves, that's what we're doing with playing with each other, and both focus directly on our emotional guidance system, and using that in our communication together. What we find the answers when we are resonating together. So it isn't about like you're going to get it with the mind. You can't get that Trinity. You can't get the cheeky. You can't get the cheeky response or idea or choice, because you're bound. You're bound into the dualistic bondage. But when you get to the cheeky, and that's what we found with resonance, that's where we're always talking about good feelings, because when we're guided by the resonance of these good feelings, then we can use that to our advantage when we have a question. If we are in a dualistic bind, with like this plays out in our personal lives. It plays out between Chelsea and I. If we're in a dualistic bind where it seems there's only right and wrong, but we are looking for the cheeky, We're looking for the weird, and it's like, oh, you can find it when you're resonating. And that's the whole idea, is shifting away from the intellect and moving into a sensory response to the world. So the weirdness is like, I'm so used to the weirdness now that, like, we see the world around us being like, if you were to look at it, if you might be in a space that you're just paralyzed because you just cannot believe the lunacy, which I can understand, especially if you're looking at it from a dualistic perspective. Like, this is a really weird bind. But that's the thing to focus on, is the thing to focus on when it's weird is our relationship to the weird. Is like, that's what we're looking for. So it can be like, I want to understand this better. Like, how do they make these choices? Well, that's the Lenzifarian way, is you find out what good feelings that they're resonating at to make the choices that they're making. You can then resonate, and the cheeky comes out. So the idea now is how we look at the weird. If we look at the weird and we can retract, we can get scared, we can be like, this is weird, this is just too much weirdness, I can't handle it. Or we can become familiar with the weird. And the reason to do this is the exciting part. Because within what can be perceived as bad weird, within that, especially, like, the great thing is, if there's there's just a massive amount of weirdness going on and shifts and changes. The mind that is focused on the good weird will find the good weird, looking for the weirdly beautiful. Like, keep your eye on that. Keep your attention to, okay, one thing, it's a lot of relief to just go like, I can't make if you're overwhelmed by all of this, just say, I can't do that. And really what you're doing is you're saying, I can't play that emotional roller coaster that is trying to find right and wrong when in the weird. Because nothing's straight. Everything's crooked. All the ideas are crooked, and they're going in lots of different ways. And you're trying to put, with a dualistic mind, you're trying to put all of that chaos together. It just, the idea of it gives me a little bit of anxiety. I'm not feeling that anxiety, but I can see how people could feel that anxiety if you're trying to put it together with a dualistic mind. But if you looked at it as a trinity, that there is the understanding of the dualistic mind, but then there is the weird. And that's the fun part. That's the Lenzifarian way. That's what Chelsea and I are all into, is finding the fun way. The fun way to do all this stuff. Wake up, to find the keyhole, to stay at the keyhole. How do you continue to remain in the present moment once you find the present moment? Because I found that you can get pulled back into all the stories because they offer you comfort, or whatever else. And it's like, once you get the keyhole, how do you stay at the keyhole? How do you keep looking at the keyhole when everybody's still fighting about the little tiny piece of the light? Anyway, some ideas. I thought I'd share one with you. And if you have ideas, throw them out. I love to nibble on ideas and then connect them all together, because all of this, the people who found the pieces of the light, they're just overlays. There's alchemy, there's astrology, there's religions, spiritual paths, philosophies. They found these little aspects of the light, and they're talking about them. But what you understand that they're just overlays. They're all talking about the same thing, but when you put the overlays together, what you're going to find is that there's a ray of light, and you're going to find the source of that light, and it's coming through a keyhole. And that keyhole is to the cheeky. It's to the weird. It's to the weirdly beautiful.